Namaste, Dhanavat Pranam.
Dhanavat Pranam, Prabhu.
We are here reading the Aesthetics of Hegel again. I'm here with Kanu Priya Devi in the UK, and I'm Krishna Keshava Dasi here in New Jersey in the USA. And just before we start, I guess we just pray for the mercy of our spiritual masters, Pomikana, Timirin Hasya, Gyananjana Salakaya, Chakshor, Militam Yena, Tasmai Shri, Gurve Namaha. And we're feeling very blessed to have the association of the devotees. Vanchakalpa Tribhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyavacha Patitanam Pavani Bhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So we were just recapping from our last class where we were really focusing on this paragraph, talking about what is involved in inspiring people's consciousness to change or evolve, and kind of Didi was just saying something about that.
Yes, just saying how, as an artist or, and as yourself as a scientist, and how we can use our art or science to engage people and to basically try and get them to maybe think a bit more deeply and essentially start that engagement or start that process of thinking about consciousness and conscious states and igniting that, starting the, I suppose, the seed, isn't it? Getting people to change and maybe just think deeply, more on a deeper level on life and who they are and what they are and what it's for, etc. So
I think from also the Krishna conscious perspective, we'd have to also acknowledge, that we actually have no power at all to change anybody's consciousness, and neither do they have any power to change their own consciousness, right? The practice of bhakti is that we recognize our finite position, we try to adopt a humble mood, and we inquire from those who are also taking up that practice and who have much experience and some realization of the scriptures and some direct realization from their own practicing life and from what they've heard from bona fide Vaishnavas. And then once we have received some mercy from them, and the Vaishnavas are always saying that mercy means service. Once we've received some service from them, and once we've heard something, Shravanam, then we're only repeating what we've heard from them. So I think that's the same thing with this, art. It would be, it might be too easy to think that now we have to rely on our own creativity because the medium is a little different than going out for Sankirtan or preaching in a straightforward way. If we're preaching through art, it's the same thing. We have no power to do anything, and no one has the power to change themselves by themselves, but we just try to present what we've heard from bona fide guru, from the sadhus, and that change, then whoever is on the receiving end of that, whether they change or not, is between their own sincere desires and Krishna. So all we can do is present the idea that we heard from the sadhus, and the better that we can do that, the more closely that we can represent that authentically without getting in the way, without letting our own ego get in the way, then the more of a chance that I think we have of helping other people, even though that's not really the goal. All we can do for them is just try to repeat what we've heard through art or through scientific preaching or through philosophy or through more traditional forms of just speaking about the religious principles, the practices. So, Didi, do you want me to continue to read, or did you want to read anything?
Yeah, no, we can continue to read. Which page is this on?
This is X, and the translator's preface.
XI.
X.
We're on X.
Yeah.
The background. Okay. I'm happy to read a little bit, and then you
Yeah.
can read. I can read a few pages.
Yeah. Whatever you're comfortable with.
So the background of all this is theological. Whatever may be thought of Hegel's theory, at first God thinks that thoughts or concepts which particularized or given embodiment or shape are nature and man. In coming to know these concepts, man comes to know his own essence, and so to consciousness of himself as self-conscious and self-knowing spirit. This is at the same time a conscious of being united with God in a concrete unity, not vanished in him, as happens, according to Hegel's interpretation, in some Eastern religions. This logico-theological process is figurated in the characteristics of religion, which Hegel regards as peculiarly Christian. God, the infinite spirit, is spirit only because he particularizes or embodies himself in a man, the incarnation. As man, he endures all the pains of an earthly lot, even unto the infinite grief of the crucifixion. But he is raised from death in the resurrection, and then elevated to glory in the ascension. Before the infinite spirit can commune with itself as spirit, it must become embodied or particularized in the infinite, in the finite. Endure the pain of self diremption, the harshness of the finite spirit's death, and then only then rise to being self-conscious and infinite spirit. From this, it follows that the negative, the finite as the opposite, and cancellation of the infinite is a necessary factor or moment in the infinite spirit itself. The incarnation is necessary in order to become infinite spirit, which is implicitly is from the start. The spirit must negate itself, posit itself as finite, and then negating this negation, i.e., as infinite negativity, rise through resurrection and ascension to a concrete infinity. Concrete because achieved through becoming particular and being enriched through it and arising out of it, while still comprehending it in itself. Can we just stop there and just go over some of this?
Sure.
So the first bit, if you're able to maybe speak a little about it.
The first paragraph.
Yeah. Okay. So again, it's talking about the nature of spirit or the nature of man, and through knowing this, one becomes to know himself. And understanding that, then is he saying that then we become, by understanding one's nature, one's true spirit, we then recognize God within ourselves and connect with that godness, self-knowing spirit. Because where it says here, this is at the same time a consciousness of being united with God in a concrete unity.
It's recognizing that we are a part of the organic whole of God without dissolving the difference between the soul, the finite soul, or finite spirit, and infinite spirit, which is God.
Mm.
So I think that's maybe the most important part of that, is recognizing this unity in difference, or identity in difference.
Mm-hmm.
And then also in the beginning, of course, it's saying that God thinks the thoughts or concepts which particularized or given embodiment or shape are nature and man. So it's, you know, laying the ground. What is the ground of nature and man, of the finite spirit and the material world? God. They're energies of God.
Mm.
And specifically, not just, so it's also giving the activity. What is the nature of the activity? It's thought.
Mm.
Thinks the thoughts, the concept.
Mm.
But this is not, you know, from the Vedic perspective, this is, you know, not to be confused with gyan. This is not, you know, I think this is pure thought, unmaterially tinged, not perverted by any kind of material.
Mm. Coming from God. This
This
is
is,
how God
yeah,
thinks.
yeah, this is
So,
the pure activity of God. Aristotle called noesis, noesios, noesis, thought, thinking, thought.
mm,
It's the pure activity of God.
consciousness. So when he's talking about then, when he's going to talk about Christ, embodies himself in a man, the incarnation, as man endures. So talking about the suffering of material life and how he's raised, resurrected, ascension. So in this next paragraph, is talking about, you know, how the like, I know specifically talking about Christ. So, and how Christ, through the pain and suffering, where it's saying here the harshness of the finite spirit's death, then and only then rise to being self-conscious and infinite spirit. Is that then referring to, like, you know, in the Gita, where it's talking about how some people come to the Lord, so through suffering, some of us, we, you know, through being done with material life, you know, is it only then that one, not only that, because there's other reasons, there's other ways to, we might interpret as self-realization, but is this then saying that in that crucifixion, in that sacrifice, in that surrender, you could say that then he's united with the infinite spirit? Would you interpret it in that way?
I wouldn't interpret it in a way where he wasn't a part of infinite spirit throughout the whole thing. It's not just that finite spirit becomes a part of infinite spirit after going through a process. So the process is realizing that it was infinite spirit the whole time.
Okay, sorry, that's what I meant. Yeah. So, but in terms of realization,
Instead of thinking about it as some succession of external circumstances which then led to some transformation, I would think it's more appropriate to think of it all as an evolution of consciousness. And again, Christ is right. The Acharyas recognized Christ as a Shakti Avesh avatar coming to teach through example. So it's showing what is necessary for the development of consciousness.
yeah,
In order to be to recognize the unity that has always been there with God, you have to sacrifice your material conception. You have to, you're not this body.
But it is coming in a maybe although it changes, essentially it's an internal process, but it's also the externally we're experiencing things on on that external level, which then affects our internal level. Here, where it's talking about, the the suffering. I know it's kind of, they're intertwined in a way, aren't they? Because it is internal, and it is, consciousness is an internal development, but is it not in our experiences, external experiences also, in terms of the suffering, in terms of that experience of suffering, that then one can then maybe question or inquire.
Yeah, well, I think this is part of Hegel's overarching theme, is that spirit, before it knows itself as spirit, before it becomes introspective, it thinks it's nature. It thinks it's this external thing. So it's absorbed in externality from itself.
Yeah.
And then it reflects upon itself due to some kind of a catalyst. So suffering, like we were saying last time, might be one of those catalysts where it's not that the experiences are actually caused from external circumstances, but our consciousness is absorbed in external thing. So when something very striking happens in that external environment, then it kind of pushes us to reflect internally, and we realize, these experiences that are happening are a result of how I see the world, how I've been living, right? And yeah,
or as Sridhar Maharaj would say, angle of vision.
Yeah.
Where we're at, because different people will understand experiences differently. So so when it's talking about the incarnation is necessary to become infinite spirit, is that just talking about that process of because where it's saying from this it follows that the negative, the infinite as the opposite, and cancellation of the infinite is a necessary factor or moment in the infinite spirit itself.
Yeah, well, I think now this is this idea that we're familiar with from Srila Sridhar Maharaj and Sripad Bori Maharaj, the thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So the thesis, we're starting from the perspective of infinite spirit. Its movement is itself, it is already infinite spirit thesis, but then it negates itself, the antithesis. it negates its infinite nature as finitude, and then the synthesis provides the new thesis to which another antithesis comes, and that's like it's how it moves, how the infinite is moving, how Krishna's pastimes are unfolding, right? But we can also understand this as, what does this mean in thought? Sripad Bhaktimadhava Puri Maharaj has talked about this, where pure thought, there is no division of subject and object in pure thought. So pure infinite thought is just thought, thinking thought, like we said before, noesis, noesios, noesis. Thought produces new thought. What's that?
Is that also unity?
It's a unity for sure. It's a unity in difference, because the thinking thought is itself, their difference is there, but it's all, it's a unity. But what I was saying is, so that's pure thought, pure infinite thought is just thought, thinking thought. But now, to negate that infinite thought or pure thought, so negating the infinite and becoming finite, then thought separates into subject and object. Now thought is making itself its own subject of thinking. So the thought separates between subject, the perceiving, and object, the perceived. And where the object is seen as external to itself. Before, in pure thought, everything was a part of that thought. But now in the subject-object relation, that finite relation, the object is not seen as a part of the subject. It's seen as something external to it. And once that subject-object relation has been created in this finite experience, that's where consciousness arises. Consciousness is the relationship between subject and object. Consciousness, so we have the knower, the known, and the process of knowing. The knower is subject, the known is the object, and the process of knowing, of the process of the knower knowing the known, that knowing process is consciousness. So that only arises in the finitude of the distinction of object from subject. But then when the subject sufficiently interacts with that object and it becomes aware of its own influence in perceiving the object, and realizes that that object is just another aspect of its own self being reflected, then it reaches that unity again, where it's not seeing something as completely external from it and separate from it. It's seeing it as a unity in difference. It comes back to that, but it comes back to that in a conscious way. Before, it may have not been aware of that dynamic. So again, so it comes back to why spirit must negate its infinite nature, posit itself as finite. And now, like you were saying, of course, this paragraph that we're talking about is specifically relating this to the pastimes of Christ and the crucifixion and the resurrection and the ascension. But I think we can also see it as die to live, right?
So I was thinking only like that sense of giving up the idea of materialism, giving up the idea of separatism.
Yeah, and of course, but in Bhakti, the idea is developed where it's, so then what? We see that we're not separate, we're a part of this organical reality. So then what? So then is when we realize that as a finite part, that what is the relationship to the infinite? It is a relationship of service. Just like in a very natural way, just like any limb of the body, right? The hand, the leg, is in service to the totality of the body. If you cut the hand off, it's not even a hand anymore, right? So the hand has its own existence as a hand, and that hand is different from a foot or an eyeball, but that's all their different purposes and different identities are for serving the totality of the body. So we really have to take seriously, this this mood and this natural truth that service is the nature of the finite in relation to the infinite. And if we're not acting in that service consciousness in a very in a very conscious way, not it's not something that the details can kind of just be like fumbled over. Like, you have to really see what is this systematic process that bhakti is showing, that service is done in shravanam, kirtanam, through faith, through surrender. It's without those things, it's only talking without actually practicing. And
it's just a realization. It's nothing more, isn't it?
It's not even a realization, because realization means we're actually practicing,
doing something about it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Because if we think that we have realized something, but we're still not actually practicing it, then there's no realization. It's still illusion.
Yeah. But is it not like, when we talk about like even with the different relationships with the Lord, and you've got like, that first acknowledgement of the Lord, that you acknowledge that there's a Lord, but it's almost like, well, is that in that acknowledgement that there's what's the relationship? Is it just an acknowledgement that there's a Lord and you're still carrying on separately?
Well, I mean, we can think about our own experience. If we have like a family member or a friend, what is a relationship? They just acknowledge our existence and keep on doing their own thing, or if they actually interact with us in the way that builds the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So where did we get to? That end of that paragraph, I think.
Yeah, you just reached the end of this. Do you want to continue from here, or do you want me to continue?
Read a bit now.
Okay. This vision of the necessity of contradiction, or the negative, and the equal necessity of transcending this bare opposition and reconciling the negative with the positive, is the prerogative of reason as distinct from understanding. This is where Kantian distinction is clearly implied. Verstand and its derivatives are translated by understanding with a capital letter. Elsewhere, Verstand is intellect, and verstandig is translated as mathematical in some architectural contexts. For Hegel, the outlook of understanding, or the scientific intellect, is one for which oppositions and contradictions are absolute. The universal, e.g., natural species, is indifferent to and outside the particulars. The universal apple is an abstraction from the indifferent, is an abstraction from and indifferent to all real apples. And this is an essential characteristic of all science. Science here is used in a modern English sense, in which science is distinguished from the arts. In Hegel's Wissenschaft, there is no such distinction. But unless the context indicates otherwise, he means by science, philosophy, or the procedure of reason, instead of that of the understanding. Reason is not to be concerned with the genre and species in a Linnean classification, but only with the categories in which the concept or the essence of natural life is particularized. These categories Hegel expounds in his philosophy of nature. Okay. Maybe we'll just say something about this before we go on. So this distinction between understanding and reason is pretty important, as I've learned from Sripad Puri Maharaj, because understanding is, so this is talking about the stages of consciousness that Hegel clarifies in his Phenomenology of Spirit, in his book, The Phenomenology of Spirit. So phenomenology means the experience of consciousness. So the Phenomenology of Spirit is what is the step-by-step systematic process that spirit experiences as being conscious. So we already talked about that first. Hegel starts with spirit is first logic, in the logic, which is consciousness, being aware of things, just in general, and then nature, being aware of things, and then being aware of nature, thinking that it is external to itself in nature. And then finally, it becomes aware of itself as spirit at the end. So in the phenomenology of spirit, that starts with sense certainty, where we're just experiencing, the five senses, the objects of the five senses. And we're certain, oh, this apple is red and, it is sweet and I enjoy it and I'm going to keep enjoying it and I'm going to share my enjoyment and we're going to do what's necessary to continue like that. We're very certain about our direct sense experience. It's just an immediate thing, very immediate. There hasn't been any kind of deeper thinking yet. Yeah. So that's sense certainty, the first stage. I'm sorry. Sense certainty is just the experience of the sense objects, and then perception is there. And perception is maybe where we can start making determinations of, liking or not liking and enjoyment. But anyway, so these sense certainty and perception are very immediate. There's no deeper thought, no mediated thought. So then after perception, sense certainty, then perception, then understanding finally comes. Understanding, Verstand is the German word, Verstand. So it's very absorbed in this dualistic consciousness only. It sees the differences in things and cannot perceive the unity. So it's very, very dualistic, so to say, and it's abstract because of that. It can't give the full picture because in order to see a full picture means you see it all, as a unity, not just the differences.
Excuse me.
Gesundheit. Hare Krishna. So then after understanding, after we're kind of just locked in this dualistic consciousness,
Am I gonna have a sneezing fit? Sorry. No, I think I'm finished. Sorry. Carry on.
So after being locked in this dualistic consciousness where we only see the differences, that we can rise above that. We can notice that these things are united, that they're related to each other. It's not just difference. And so once we start being able to see the unity in things, that's reason. So the big difference between understanding and reason, as far as I understand, is understanding, or the German word Verstand, is very locked in this consciousness of just seeing the differences. So we're comparing things and judging them based on their differences alone. And then reason, which is the German word Vernunft, means that we're starting to see the unity and the relationship in a more developed way. And so overall, that transition goes from certainty in an immediate sense. We're immediately perceiving everything, and then we become very certain of it, kind of an egoic certainty. And then that develops through mediated thought. Then we become closer to truth. So the distinction between certainty and truth is the difference between the immediacy of sense perception or the mediated reason, which sees the unity in things and starts to approach what is the actual truth. So that's pretty much it for that first paragraph.
Yeah, okay.
And
So that's quite significant, really, then, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely.
That's like the tool, isn't it, really, in a sense, to facilitate some change by being able to reason, being able to see the unity in things, to make that, having that analytical or that observation, to be able to think on a wider scale than just, if you think about a lot of people, like you're saying earlier about sense perception, generally people are just on that level of, I like this and I'm going to do that, of experiencing just that thing without making any connection with with that organic whole, with everything, and where the suffering is. I'm suffering right now with this cold. I'm thinking, am I going to sneeze? What am I going to do next? Sorry.
Do you have access to any fresh ginger root and turmeric root?
Yeah, I have actually. I've got fresh ginger downstairs, and it's just the time of the evening. It's like those things, early in the morning and evening. It seems to get a bit worse. It's fine. It's all coming out, so it probably sounds worse. I actually don't feel bad. It's fine. It's just a bit interruptive.
So then this second paragraph here starts to talk about universals.
Right? I know Raj has talked a lot about that.
Yeah.
Idea of apple or fruit, and then apples, and then different types of apples.
Yes, exactly. I remember actually you brought this up a couple of times to him. You asked about it further. I remember you at one point you did. So the idea is, in my imperfect way of describing, that every concept has three essential features. UPI, universal, particular, individual. So universal, particular, individual means genus, species, specimen. We can compare it to that, where...
Say that again. It was the last bit you said.
Yeah. So universal, particular, individual is genus, species, and specimen, where the genus means feline, let's say. Genus, yeah, Genus, genus. So like the genus would be a feline, and the species would be a tiger, and the specimen would actually be the tiger that you saw in the forest, that you encounter in the external environment. So we're only encountering the individual or the specimen in the external environment, but that specimen or individual is participating in a wider conceptual environment, which is not perceivable to the senses directly, but we can know it through what the senses perceive.
So you're saying, say that in the example of the tiger, you're saying that the genus would be feline, the species would be tiger, and the specimen would be the tiger in its environment.
Yeah, that you actually encounter physically. So we can understand that, again, the relationship is from top down, from universal to individual. We're seeing more determination in the concept, right? Feline has less determination than tiger, because when we say tiger, we've made a determination that now has negated lion, cheetah, leopard. All those have been negated when we make the determination tiger. And then when we make a determination of the tiger in front of us, that's the negation of any other tiger that's not in front of us. So the relationship is characterized by that. It's further determination of the concept until it's in front of us And so Sripad Bhaktimadhava Puri Maharaj has also said that these three aspects of every concept also relates to the absolute, of course. So how does that relate to the absolute? Universal is Brahman, and particular is Paramatma.
Yeah.
An individual is Bhagavan, Krishna.
Yeah.
We know Brahman is the least determinate, right? The effulgence, the Brahma Jyoti, where everything is just one homogeneous substance. So, then Paramatma is more determinate, of course, than Brahman. Paramatma is the super soul, but the super soul is within the heart of every living entity, right? Within every atom. And then further determined Bhagavan, Krishna. Krishna is there in Goloka only.
Yeah.
So, of course, everything is emanating from Krishna, but is all his energy. But still, he's Swayam Bhagavan Krishna is only in Goloka. Very determinate pastimes.
Yeah.
Although they're also, of course, Navayovanam, infinitely renewing and fresh also. So, Achintya Beta Beta Tattva. But these kind of like systematic things that are being given us here through Hegel, through Sripad Puri Maharaj, I think also help to like give some kind of a structure for maybe how artistic things can be like developed. I think because there's some we can communicate these kind of ideas in a relatively efficient way, so that maybe we can also incorporate that into
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It kind of does break things down a lot on a deeper level, which makes you think more. Interesting.
So, did you want me to continue from the next paragraph, or did you want to say anything?
Finish that bit, yeah.
Everything in nature is finite, bounded by something else, but spirit is infinite. This conception of the infinite occurs frequently in these lectures, and it may need some explanation. A straight line prolonged indefinitely is an image of what Hegel calls the bad infinite. The true infinite is better imagined as a circle, i.e., as a line which does not go on indefinitely but returns into itself. The infinite for Hegel is not the boundless, but the self-bounded. Spirit as self-conscious is infinite because in self-consciousness, subject and object coincide. Mere consciousness is limited by the objects of which it is conscious and therefore is finite. In self-consciousness, this limitation vanishes. The stones forming a cairn have a unity in the cairn, but this is only an abstract and finite unity. The stones are indifferent to one another and are unaltered whether they are collected into a cairn or remain scattered on the hillside. The unity of lovers is quite different. It is a concrete and infinite unity because each of them is necessary to the other and is what he is because the other is. The unity of their love is constitutive of their very being. Hegel prided himself on having taught philosophy to speak German. He tries to use ordinary German words to avoid technical and Latin terminology. It might seem, therefore, that ordinary German words could be translated directly into ordinary English, but this is not always so. Hegel imposes a technical sense of his own on some ordinary German words, e.g. das Moment or des Text. But then he uses these words sometimes in his technical sense and sometimes in their ordinary sense. The translator must make up his mind whether one of these words is being used technically or ordinarily and adopt his translation accordingly. The same English word will not always suffice to render the same German word. This must be premised to the following notes on some of the terms commonly used in these lectures. Okay, so I mean that's kind of going into a different subject, so I guess we should just say one thing about this last paragraph. So these two kinds of infinite. Here this author is saying, or the commenter translator is saying bad infinite and good infinite. But I know, I think Hegel, Sripad Bhaktivedanta Maharaj wrote an essay on this that's available on his GWF Hegel website. Let me just show it actually. Finite, spurious infinite, and true infinite. So basically, the spurious infinite is when people think that infinite just means unlimited, period. There is no limitation on the infinite. You can't even actually talk about the infinite, because as soon as you talk about the infinite, you're limiting it to words, and the infinite is unlimited, so you can't limit it to words. That is the spurious infinite, as Hegel calls it, which is less actually than the true infinite. That the true infinite, if it is really infinite, unlimited, it must possess its own limitation. It must have that. Otherwise, if it doesn't have that, then it's a limitation. If it does not possess its own limitation, then that in itself is a limitation, is a finitude, is restriction of its freedom. Right? It's a restriction of the freedom of the infinite. So, I mean, this is exactly what's seen so far in how can spirit not know its spirit and think that it's nature and like this kind of external consciousness. That is its own limitation that it's putting on itself. So I know in relation to this, Sripad Puri Maharaj has said, so what does that mean? Is there is there a hill big enough that, can Krishna create a hill big enough that he cannot lift? If he must be having his own limitation within himself, he must be able to create a hill so big that he cannot lift it. So Sripad Puri Maharaj says, yes, of course, Krishna is not limited. He can create a hill so big that he can't lift it, but then he can lift it. He can then overcome that limitation. So he has the real limitation is there, and then he also has the ability to overcome that limitation.
Exactly. And the sort of beauty in Krishna consciousness is like these dichotomies that are kind of there, It's so poetic. Lovely.
So, I mean, that's also an important point. So, yeah, I guess that's all I can really say about that.
Link to the that paper.
Go back to that.
Are you able to send? What's that one?
Can you see it on the screen?
Yeah, the top bit. Is that the top link there at the top?
Yeah. Right now it says Hegel's Science of Philosophy, Finite, Spurious, Infinite, and True Infinite.
Just take. Look.
Oh yeah, the link is there on top.
Yeah.
Oh, you want me to put it in the chat?
Yeah, it's fine. I can. I've just taken a screenshot, so I can go back to that and find it. It's fine.
Okay. So, yeah. So I mean, this is actually nice how he ends this here, right? He says, yeah, okay. The stones forming a cairn. I'm assuming, I don't really know what a cairn is. I'm assuming it's just a pattern or something. The stones forming a cairn have a unity in the cairn, but this is only abstract and finite unity. The stones are indifferent to one another and are unaltered, whether they are collected into the cairn or remain scattered on the hillside. The unity of lovers, sorry?
No, go
on. The unity of lovers is quite different. It is a concrete and infinite unity because each of them is necessary to the other and is what he is because the other is. The unity of their love is constitutive of their very being. So this directly relates to what is the difference between a mechanical system and an organic system, or organic whole and a mechanical whole. Because the
Cairn is a man-made pile or stack of stones raised for purpose, usually as a marker. I think it's just like a burial mound. I think it's just saying, the relationship between stone and stone.
So then in that pile of stones, the relationship of each stone to each other is purely external.
Yeah.
The stone is going to be the exact same stone whether or not it's in that pile or 5 yards away from each other. So that unity is purely caused only by an external force uniting them. Something external just piles them up, and they're completely indifferent to each other, the stones. But in the organic whole, the unity is much different because, first of all, the parts of the organic whole are not just put together externally, like somebody building a pile of stones. Each of the parts that's different from the other parts they grow together, right? Like the embryo of a living entity, it grows, the arms, the feet, the eyes, everything is growing together. And they're related to each other. Right? If you take out the heart and the lungs, then the arms won't be able to function as arms. Like, the body will die. I mean, so if you harm the whole, then the other parts won't just remain what they are. They'll also cease to be what they are because it's all about serving the purpose of that whole organism, of the organic whole. So that is, very much what this is saying here. The unity of lovers is quite different. It is concrete and infinite unity because each of them is necessary to the other and is what he is because the other is.
Yeah. Could you say that there's then a dependence between each other in that sense?
Yeah, interdependence.
Stones are not dependent on one another to be a stone or to be in that pile. And it's a pile, you need other stones to make a pile, but essentially it's, in that unity of lovers, there's that there has to be that to understand what you're saying.
It's not just external, there's an internal attraction.
Yeah,
the attraction is there.
Yeah, otherwise they're not. Yeah. And then the next bit just goes on to him talking about his translation.
Yeah, it's I think it's a different section. Like it says B here, so it's transitioning. This was A, I guess. Yeah, this started here as A, and A ends here. So now he's going to talk about, I guess, some comments about the translations of the words, which I'm sure is helpful. But
thank you. Yeah, there's a lot in there, isn't there? Even just in those little pages that we've read.
I mean, we've talked about the idea of the relationship between spirit, nature, between God, God, human, and or God, finite soul, and nature, and how that relationship unfolds from the perspective of the person engaging with nature and then coming to some kind of a suffering that makes them reflect internally and inquire about the truth, and how in Veda that leads to then establishing the relationship with the spiritual master and having to engage in service activity in order to make progress. And that progress, again, is not an external thing. That progress is a cultivation of vision, is a subjective evolution of consciousness. And we can see what some of those steps are in that subjective evolution of consciousness through what Hegel describes in his phenomenology of spirit, right? The sense, certainty, then perception, understanding, reason, self-consciousness, and spirit. And then considering what is the difference between the spurious infinite and the true infinite. In the dynamic of the universal, particular, individual. And the last thing we talked about is the nature of mechanical wholes and organic wholes, and the unity of how those systems, or how are those wholes united? What are the characteristics that makes them different, and why is that significant? Definitely all important ideas to think about, and that are described in ways, which may inspire creative expression. Did you have any ending thoughts, or anything you wanted to say, Didi?
No, I think it's just digesting it all.
Yeah.
And thinking about things, obviously, always trying to think on how they can be useful, how these concepts can be useful, as you were saying earlier, to use them in an artistic way that can facilitate that for somebody else, whether that's just in a visual format or interactive format or something. So yeah, I think to sort of just formulate these ideas and read them and get them down and digest them is it's just a good starting point. Have to go through them all again. I'm just thinking about that, how that might translate. But it's nice, thank you. It's good. it's good. And lots of new terminologies and things, I think, which is the thing, which is interesting. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Didi, for your association.
Thank you so much. It's very good. Anything you think? Anything on your side?
No. Just that, again, we really have no capacity to do anything by ourselves, in the most literal sense. So it's only possible by the grace of Krishna through his bona fide agents, by Sri Guru, that we can do anything, try to have some small service, try to see something in the proper way, connecting to the center. It's only by the grace of
by grace of Gurudev.
yes,
Yeah,
only way.
So how is Madhava Puri Maharaj? Is he well? He's okay?
He's okay. Yeah.
Good. Send my Dandavat pranams.
Of course.
And hopefully see you on Saturday.
Yes.
Yeah. To write these up. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Didi.
Speak soon.
Jai Srila Jai Sripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj Ki Jai Jai Srila Prabhupada Srila Guru Maharaj Srila Gurudev Srila Acharya Dev Srila Shanta Maharaj Ki Jai Jai Sama Bhakti Veda Vrinda Ki Jai Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.